Hi class, welcome to a mini lecture on stages of psychosexual development. So we already heard about the id, the ego, and the superego, and the conscious, the unconscious, and the preconscious. And so that kind of lays the groundwork for understanding Freud's stages of psychosexual development. Freud says that we pass through these stages, that this goes from birth to adulthood, and that these are times when our personality is being formed. That's why Freud is here in the personality chapter. Freud's theory is a theory of therapy. Psychoanalytic therapy comes out of Freud, but Freud is also giving us a theory of personality and why our personalities develop the way that they do. Freud's theory of psychosexual development is a precursor to Erikson's stages of psychosocial development that we already hit in the development chapter. Remember, Erikson is a neo-Freudian. He takes Freud's ideas and he runs in a slightly different direction with it. So let's take a look at the precursor at Freud's stages of psychosexual development. So remember with Erikson, there was a psychosocial crisis that occurred at each stage. So trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, identity versus role confusion. Here there is also a bit of a conflict that has to be dealt with. The five stages are oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. So let's take a look at each of those stages. We'll see what the erogenous zone is, as well as the conflict that has to be dealt with. An erogenous zone is a zone that gives us pleasure. Erogenous means physical pleasure. And remember, the id is after pleasure. It operates on the pleasure principle, and it's interested in sex and aggression and getting all of its needs met. Well, at each stage, there is an erogenous zone that provides this pleasure and is sort of a focus of the id. But there's some kind of conflict because we can't necessarily just gratify these pleasures anytime we feel like it, can we? Not really. So the oral stage is from birth to age 1.5, and the erogenous zone is the mouth. So, what does a baby want to do between birth and 1.5 years old? If you hand them anything, it's immediately going to go in the mouth. It is the way that they explore the world. They explore through acting on the world and through touch, and primarily through the mouth. They also love to suck and chew and gum on things. They do this partly for because it's nutritive, right? They suck on nipples for nourishment. They chew for nourishment. They chew and gum to relieve teething pain, and they suck for soothing. So there's just a lot happening with the mouth, and that's why that's the erogenous zone. Now, what's the conflict here? Can they go around sucking and chewing and gumming on everything forever? Can they stay attached to the breast? I'll bet some of you know a baby who had a really difficult time weaning, or a mother who says, my baby is 1.5 years and I really want to wean. She's constantly wanting to nurse, even though it's not really for nutrition. So the conflict is weaning. That can be a very, very difficult thing for a child. Some children wean pretty easily, and some have a difficult time with that. If the child has a difficult time with it, maybe it was abrupt, maybe there was a lot of emotion around that, maybe the baby was really using the breast for comfort and didn't seem to be able to figure out a good substitute and another way to get comfort. Freud argues that this has an indelible imprint on personality that will show up in adulthood. And when there is a conflict around the erogenous zone, Freud argues that we become fixated on that erogenous zone. So a baby that had difficult time weaning will become fixated on anything oral and will develop what's called an oral fixation. And so what that might look like in an adult is something like an adult who smokes heavily, or is a drinker, or a nail biter, or talks too much, or constantly has to have something in their mouth. Maybe they're an overeater. Maybe they have to drink soda all day or tea all day. Maybe they chew on pencils. Okay, those would all be considered oral fixations. And you can see the talking too much is sort of a personality feature, right? And smoking and drinking and nail biting are behaviors, but they also are sort of personality features. Somebody who's kind of dependent on something. Okay, so that's the oral stage. The next stage is the anal stage, from 1.5 to 3 years. And what, of course, is the big crisis in the toddler years? It is clearly potty training. And so Freud will argue that the erogenous zone at this time is the anus, and that the focus is eliminating and controlling bodily functions. The conflict is toilet training. You know, toilet training should not be a high pressure situation, and no child should ever be made to feel bad for what they produce. It smells bad, right? It's kind of gross. Let's just be real about that. But if you say, "Ooh, yuck, stinky, poop," and you're making a big fuss about it, the child can get really embarrassed and can develop some anxiety. Sorry about that, around toilet training. The results of this fixation, sorry. The results of this fixation can be a person who is very rule-bound, stingy, or chaotic. So you can see this kind of goes two ways. It can be somebody who's rule-bound and stingy. You've heard the term somebody is anal. Oh, he's so anal. What do we mean by that? We mean that they're really uptight, that they're very focused on rules, that everything has to be just so. They get bent out of shape and they're not flexible. This might be the result of a child who had difficulty with toilet training and they wanted to hold it all in. I don't know if you've ever heard of a situation like that. Sometimes children will be afraid to pass their bowel movements. They're afraid they might fall into the toilet. They've been made to feel ashamed of what comes out. And so this can be a child who grows up to be an anal type of person who's rule-bound and kind of uptight. The other way it could go is somebody who is very chaotic. And we would call this an anal expulsive personality. So rather than being anal and holding it in, it's somebody who's anal and pushing it all out. In modern terms, we would call this internalizing and externalizing, I suppose. But if a person has developed a very chaotic, explosive personality, then maybe the conflict with toilet training was where they were traumatized by the toilet training, and now they just want to let it all out. Okay, so that is our anal stage, and the next stage is called the phallic stage from ages 3 to 6. And the erogenous zone here is the genitals. And you might be thinking, wow, really? 3 to 6 year olds having a pleasure zone around the genitals? Well, yes, they do. They start to develop sexual feelings and awareness of self. According to Freud, I think that he emphasizes this a bit more than is realistic, but yes, they do. And so children from ages 3 to 6 will sometimes engage in masturbatory behavior. The conflict here is according to Freud, autoeroticism. Children may, when they're weaned and can no longer get soothing through sucking, may discover that when they put their hand down there, that feels kind of good. And so there have been many a parent who will discover their child doing something like that, or children playing doctor. It's the same thing. And so I'll just say, from a parenting perspective, you don't want to shame a child for this any more than you want to shame them for toilet training either. You just simply say, we don't do that, and redirect them towards something else that will provide some soothing, because that's why they're doing it. It provides pleasure and soothing. So spend some time with the child saying, well, we don't do that. We keep our hands, outside of our pants, and just be real calm and matter of fact, and then take them and go play with them. Go play Chutes and Ladders together, and they will find that happy and comforting, and will probably pretty quickly be able to be redirected. If there's a conflict here, if mom and dad shame them, or if they don't have any other way of getting their feelings for safety and comfort and soothing and pleasure met in an appropriate way, the fixation that can occur, the genital fixation can result in an adult who is promiscuous, overly flirtatious, very vain, overly dependent on other people, or maybe engages in excessive masturbation. Most people do masturbate, men more so than women. This is a normal behavior. So when we talk about it here in terms of a fixation, we're talking about excessive behavior beyond the norm. There comes a time when children think the opposite sex has cooties, and that is called the latency stage. And this is ages 6 years through puberty. This is the period during which children develop mentally, socially, and physically. And they're doing so much with that, learning so much about the world, that sexuality is repressed, according to Freud. So there is no erogenous zone and no fixation here. Of course, what happens at puberty? Sexual development occurs. And so here we have the genital stage again, and this is puberty and beyond, and the erogenous zone is the genitals. And the focus is on reawakening sexuality and relationships. And if it is not possible to steer this interest in sexuality and relationships in an appropriate direction, then there will be conflict around that. The conflict here is sex and aggression, an appropriate way to engage in sexual gratification, an appropriate way to manage one's natural instinct for aggression. If we don't resolve this well, the results are a fixation in which we are not able to thrive as an adult in activities we're supposed to be doing, such as work and love. So a person who doesn't seem to be able to be successful in the work world, isn't successful in relationships, may not have resolved the genital stage in puberty and beyond particularly well. Out of this, we get a couple of ideas of the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex. I think I'm going to have started a new video for that one. So we'll see you on in that video.